The crash nobody saw coming was late evening in Los Angeles. The sky had turned a soft orange, and the sun was slowly sinking behind the hills. Most people were rushing home, tired from a long day. Traffic was moving slow on Sunset Boulevard. Horns honking, engines rumbling. But on a quiet side street near a gas station, something was about to happen that would change two lives forever. Keanu Reeves was driving his old black motorcycle. He liked the feel of the wind on his face, the sound of the engine under him. It was one of those rare evenings when he had no meetings, no scripts, no cameras following him. He was just a man on his bike, enjoying the fading light dot as he stopped. At a red light, he noticed a small silver car across the road. It was an older model, probably from the early 2000s. The driver was an old man. White hair, glasses, both hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. He looked nervous, almost lost. The car was shaking slightly. Something wasn't right then. It happened. The silver car suddenly rolled forward, even though the light was still red. It moved slowly at first, then picked up speed. Keanu's eyes widened. The old man wasn't hitting the brakes. He wasn't even turning the wheel. He seemed frozen. People shouted. A woman screamed. The car crashed into a streetlight pole with a loud bang. Glass shattered. The hood crumpled like paper. Sparks flew. Everything went silent for a moment, like the world had paused. Then came the smoke. Then came the panic. Keanu didn't think twice. He jumped off his motorcycle and ran toward the crash. People stood frozen, recording with their phones. But Keanu didn't stop. He shouted, "Call 911." As he rushed to the driver's side, the old man was slumped forward, blood dripping from his forehead. His glasses had fallen off, and he was mumbling something. Keanu gently opened the door, ignoring the hot smoke and sharp metal. "Sir, can you hear me?" he asked, his voice calm but urgent. The man groaned. His lips moved. Keanu leaned in. I couldn't stop. My leg ... It froze. Keanu nodded, pulling the seatbelt off and supporting the man's back. "You're okay, I've got you. Help is coming." Someone ran over with a towel. Keanu used it to press gently against the man's bleeding head. He didn't know who the man was. He didn't care. He just saw a human being who needed help. As sirens wailed in the distance, the old man looked up at Keanu, his eyes weak but filled with something strange. Like recognition, he whispered, "You're KeanuReeves ... aren't you?" Keanu smiled a little, still holding the towel to his head. "Yeah. But right now I'm just a guy trying to help." Paramedics arrived. They took over, carefully lifting the man onto a stretcher. Keanu stayed close, making sure he was stable. The old man gripped his hand as they rolled him toward the ambulance. "Thank you," he whispered again. "You don't know what you've done." Keanu nodded but felt something strange in that sentence. What did he mean by "you don't know"? After the ambulance left, Keanu stood alone for a moment. People came over, thanking him, taking pictures from afar. But he didn't stay. He got back on his bike and rode off into the evening. He couldn't shake off the old man's face. Or his words. 3 days passed. Keanu kept checking the local news, but there was nothing more about the crash. No names, no updates. Something inside him kept pulling. He needed to know if the old man was okay. So he went back to the same street, hoping someone remembered. The cashier at the gas station recognized him and said, the man's name was George. Ambulance took him to St. Francis Hospital. Without hesitation, Keanu headed straight there. He walked into the hospital, asked the nurse at the front desk. She looked at him like she couldn't believe her eyes. Are you Keanu Reeves? He smiled kindly. I'm here to check on a patient. His name's George. He was in a car crash a few days ago. She nodded slowly. Room 312. He's awake. Keanu walked down the quiet hall, each step filled with something he couldn't name. Maybe worry. Maybe curiosity. Maybe fate. He knocked gently and pushed the door open. There was George, sitting up in bed, his head wrapped in bandages but smiling. And not just a weak smile. A full one. A grateful one. "You came," George said. Keanu nodded. And sat down. "Of course. I needed to see how you were doing." George's eyes softened. Most people wouldn't have stopped that night. And even if they did, they would have waited for help. You didn't wait. You ran into danger. You saved me. Keanu shrugged. "You were hurt. Anyone would have done the same." "No," George said firmly. "They wouldn't have." There was a long pause. Then George leaned in a little and said something that made Keanu freeze. "I have something to tell you. But I want to wait until tomorrow." Keanu frowned slightly. "Why tomorrow?" George smiled again, this time with mystery. "Because today you came here out of kindness. Tomorrow your life might change forever." Keanu left the hospital that evening with his heart full of questions. He had no idea that the old man he saved was not just an ordinary man. He was someone who had been hiding from the world for years. And now he had chosen Keanu for something truly unbelievable. The invitation. Next morning, Keanu woke up early, still thinking about George's strange words. Your life might change forever. What did that even mean? Was it a joke? Or was the old man hiding something deeper? He made himself a cup of coffee and sat by the window. The sky was still gray, with soft clouds moving slowly above the city. Everything felt quiet on the outside, but inside, his mind was full of noise. He didn't usually let curiosity take over like this. He had learned to stay private, to keep his life simple. But this time was different. There was something in George's eyes. Something unfinished. So he got dressed, grabbed a small bag of fruits and books for George, and headed back to St. Francis Hospital. When he walked into room 312, George was already sitting up, dressed in a clean shirt, his bandage now smaller. "Came back," George said, smiling warmly. Keanu placed the bag on the side table. "I told you I would. And you said you had something to tell me." George's eyes twinkled. He looked at Keanu with a mix of gratitude and something deeper like admiration. "Yes," George said slowly. "But first, let me tell you who my full name is George Raymond Easton." Keanu nodded, not recognizing it. "I used to be the owner of Easton Ventures," George continued. "Maybe that still doesn't mean much. But 20 years ago, I was on the cover of Forbes. I built one of the biggest private equity firms in the country." Keanu's eyebrows rose slightly. He had heard of Easton Ventures. It was a name that appeared in headlines, business talks, and even documentaries. But George looked nothing like the sharp-suited man from those stories. "Wait, you're that George Easton?" Keanu asked, stunned. George nodded, then gave a tired laugh. "I stepped away from it all 10 years ago. Sold my shares, gave up the offices. I wanted peace. But with peace came loneliness. And eventually sickness." Keanu listened carefully. He could tell the story was not about wealth. It was about something else. "I lost my wife to cancer 8 years ago," George continued. "No children, no family left. I've been living alone ever since. And that day, the crash. It was a moment I thought might be the end." His voice cracked for a second. Keanu didn't interrupt. "But you," George said, looking directly into Keanu's eyes, "you stepped in. Not because you knew who I was. Not because cameras were rolling. You did it because you're a good man." Keanu looked down, feeling humbled. "I just couldn't walk away, that's all." George smiled. "And that's exactly why I want to offer you something." Keanu looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" George reached for a small envelope on the table and handed it to him. Keanu opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten letter and a single gold key. He read the letter in silence, his hands tightening as he reached the end. Then he looked back at George. "What is this?" George leaned back, breathing deeply. "That key opens a gate to my private house in Malibu. It's been closed for years. But I want you to go there. Spend a day, walk around. See what it means to leave everything behind and still find meaning. Everything inside is yours now." Keanu was stunned. "George, I can't accept that." But George shook his head gently. "You saved me. This is not a reward, this is a gift. Because when I was at my worst, you reminded me that goodness still exists." Keanu didn't know what to say. The air in the room felt heavy and light at the same time. "Will you go?" George asked Dot after a long pause. Keanu nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll go," George smiled. "Good, there's something waiting for you there." That evening, Keanu drove along the coast toward Malibu, the gold key in his pocket. The road curved with the ocean, waves crashing softly beside him. He kept looking at the note. There was something in George's handwriting that felt emotional, almost like a goodbye. Dot. When he reached the gate, he found an old sign that read, "Eastwind." He placed the key in the lock, turned it, and the gates creaked open. He stepped into a long pathway lined with trees, leading to a house that looked like something from a dream. Stone walls, wooden beams, and large windows that opened to the sea. Everything was quiet, peaceful. Keanu opened the door and stepped inside. The air smelled like old books and fresh ocean wind. On the table near the entrance was a small envelope. His name was written on it. He opened it slowly. It was another letter from George. "Keanu, by the time you read this, I may be sleeping or gone. I've been sick for a while now, but I never wanted pity. What I wanted was to meet someone who reminded me that the world still has heart. You gave me that in one moment, by doing something so simple, just being human. Please read the journal in the study. It holds everything I never told anyone. I believe in fate. And now, I believe you were meant to be the one to finish my story. Thank you for giving me peace at the end. George Raymond Easton." Keanu sat down, holding the letter for a long time. Mick felt something shift inside him. He didn't know what he was about to uncover, but he knew. This wasn't just a gift. It was a mission. Asterisk. The journal in the studio. Keanu stood in the entrance of the Malibu house, the second letter still shaking in his hands. He looked around slowly, taking in the silence. The place didn't feel abandoned. It felt like it had been waiting for him. He walked through the living room where soft golden light fell through wide windows. The air was filled with the faint smell of sea breeze and old wood. There was a quiet piano in the corner, untouched. Yet everything felt warm, lived in, like someone had once loved it deeply. Then he remembered the line from George's letter. "Please read the journal in the study." Keanu found the study at the end of the hall. The room was filled with books, hundreds of them, lining the shelves from floor to ceiling. But on the desk, right in the center, sat a brown leather journal. It looked worn, as if it had been opened 1,000 times. And on the first page, George had written, "My name is George Raymond Easton, and if you're reading this, then you must be the man who saved me." Keanu sat down and began to read. The pages told the story of a man who had everything and lost it all. George had built his business from scratch. He worked endless hours, closed impossible deals, and climbed higher than he ever thought possible. But in that climb, he missed birthdays. He skipped anniversaries. He turned love into a later that never came. His wife Helen had been the only person who saw the real George. She stayed by his side through the chaos, but cancer took her too soon. The journal described every detail, every hospital visit, every goodbye he never wanted to say. "I would have traded every dollar," George wrote, "just to hear her laugh one more time." Keanu turned the pages slowly. His chest tightened as he read the next part. After Helen's death, George had tried to keep going. He buried himself in work, But inside something broke. He stopped caring about meetings, about status, about being seen, so he sold everything and vanished. I gave away 90% of my fortune, George wrote. The rest I kept hidden, waiting for the right person. Not someone with a business mind, not someone with a silver tongue. Someone with a heart. Keanu paused. There were photos in the journal, 2 pictures of George and Helen on beaches, at small cafes, holding hands in gardens. He saw a younger George smiling with his eyes closed, like peace had once been real for him. But then came the last few pages, and they changed everything. If you made it this far, then I believe you are that person. You didn't save me because of who I was. You saved me because you're someone who still believes in kindness. And that's rare now. Inside the locked drawer below this desk is the full story. The bank account, the documents, and the final letter. Take it, or don't. It's your choice. But if you open it, promise me something. Use it to do something good. Not big, not flashy. Just good. Keanu leaned back in the chair. Everything felt unreal. He looked at the bottom drawer and saw a tiny key taped to the inside cover of the journal. He slid it into the lock, hand trembling slightly, and opened it. Inside was a thick envelope. When he opened it, what he found took his breath away. Legal documents transferring ownership of the Malibu house to him. Bank statement showing an account under George's name with over $50 million. A handwritten note with just 5 words. You saved more than my life. Keanu sat in silence. His heart was pounding, not with excitement, but with something heavier, something sacred. He didn't know what to do with it. He never wanted anything in return. But now he held more power than he ever asked for. And all of it came with a single request: do something good. Later that night, Keanu returned to the hospital. George was asleep, breathing slowly, a soft hum of machines around him. The nurse smiled when she saw him and whispered, "He's been waiting for you all day." Keanu sat beside the bed and took George's hand gently. "I read your journal," he whispered. George didn't open his eyes, but he smiled. "Then you know everything." "Yeah," Keanu said softly. "But you forgot to mention one thing." George's fingers twitched slightly. "What's that?" Keanu leaned in. "You never stopped being human. You just needed someone to remind you." George chuckled faintly. "Maybe we both did." The next morning, George slipped away peacefully in his sleep. The nurses said it was calm, like he had finally found rest. Keanu stood at his bedside, heart full of sadness and respect. He didn't cry in front of anyone. But when he walked out of the hospital alone, tears filled his eyes, not because he had lost someone he just met, but because he had gained someone who had shown him a deeper truth about life. A stranger who became something like family. But George's story wasn't over. Keanu now carried the final chapter. He had no idea just how far it would go. The final chapter begins. Keanu spent the next few days in quiet reflection. The Malibu house, once silent and still, now felt alive with memory. Everywhere he turned, he saw little pieces of George, his books, his framed photos, handwritten notes on sticky pads still stuck to the fridge. Reminders of a life full of pain and love, of mistakes and redemption. Keanu didn't tell anyone what had happened, not yet. He didn't want headlines. He didn't want praise. This story was not for the world to exploit. It was something sacred. Something that had changed him. But he kept thinking about George's final wish. Do something good. That line kept echoing in his head like a soft drumbeat. So one morning, Keanu drove down to a quiet diner on the edge of town. It was the same place where he and George had once shared a silent glance through the window, weeks before the crash. George had been sitting alone at a corner table. Keanu hadn't noticed it back then, but now he remembered it clearly. He sat at that same table. The waitress, a tired but kind woman in her late 50s, came over with a smile. "Coffee?" she asked. Keanu nodded. Yes, please. As she poured the coffee, she looked at him closely. You look familiar, she said gently. I get that a lot, Keanu replied with a soft grin. She laughed. Well, whoever you are, you seem like someone who listens. He raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? She leaned in slightly. Just a feeling. Most people don't notice folks like me. But you looked me in the eye when you ordered. That tells me something. Keanu took a sip of the coffee. I think the world needs more of that. The woman's name was Gloria. She had been working at the diner for over 30 years. Raised 3 kids on her own, had never taken a vacation. Her knees hurt, and her hands shook sometimes when she poured drinks, but she never complained. Keanu left a $500 tip that day, without a word. He just folded it beneath the bill and walked out. He didn't stop there. Over the next few weeks, Keanu began visiting different places, quiet places. A struggling animal shelter on the edge of the city. A small school with broken windows and peeling walls. A community center run by veterans who hadn't received real help in years. He didn't throw money around blindly. He sat, he listened, he asked questions. He understood. And then, without anyone knowing, he began to help. He paid to rebuild the school roof. He funded medical treatment for sick animals at the shelter. He bought new furniture and equipment for the Veterans Center. But he did it all under the name George Raymond Easton. When people asked who George was, Keanu simply smiled and said, just someone who believed in second chances. One night, after weeks of this quiet giving, Keanu returned to the Malibu house. He walked out onto the back porch and sat under the stars. The ocean waves crashed below, steady and calming. He pulled out George's journal again. Even though he had read it a dozen times. This time, he opened to the very last page. There, in George's shaky handwriting, was a final note that Keanu hadn't noticed before. Keanu, if you ever read this last page, know one thing. The money means nothing if it doesn't carry a heartbeat. Make it breathe. Make it feel. Make it real. Keanu closed the journal slowly and looked out at the stars. I will, he whispered. The next morning, Keanu made a decision. One that would change everything. He called his lawyer and asked to set up a foundation. What name would you like to use for it? The lawyer asked. Keanu paused for a long moment, then answered softly, the Easton Foundation. The lawyer nodded. And what's its mission? Keanu smiled. To find the people nobody sees and remind them they matter. In the months that followed, the Easton Foundation quietly began to touch lives all across the country. No press, no interviews. Just help. A small girl in Nevada with a rare heart condition received life-saving surgery. An old jazz musician in New Orleans finally got his first proper album recorded, funded and printed. A homeless mother in Chicago was moved into her own apartment with her kids. Fridge full, lights on, beds warm. Each time a small note was delivered with the gift. You were seen, you were heard, you are not forgotten. The Easton Foundation. And somewhere deep in his soul, Keanu knew George was smiling. But something unexpected was about to happen. Something that would test Keanu's promise. A letter arrived one morning. No return address. Just a single name written in black ink on the envelope. Helen. Keanu froze. He opened it carefully. Inside was a photograph of George and Helen, younger, laughing under a tree. And with it, a short note. I'm Helen's sister. George never told you everything. I think it's time you come meet me. I know what he left behind. Keanu looked up from the letter, heart pounding. What could possibly be left? And what didn't George tell him? The secret Helen left behind. Keanu sat quietly at the dining table of the Malibu house, holding the letter in both hands. The name Helen still echoed in his mind. He had read George's journal, seen the photographs, felt the grief in every sentence George wrote about her. George had loved Helen more than anything. And now, someone claiming to be her sister had Written to him. He looked at the back of the photo again. There was handwriting in faded ink. Oak tree, 1976. She laughed so loud that day. It was a gentle kind of love that lived in this picture. The kind of love that doesn't fade even when years pass and memories fade. Keanu called the number on the note the next morning. A quiet, elderly voice answered. Hello? Hi, this is Keanu. I received a letter from you. You said you're Helen's sister. There was a pause on the other end. Then a soft chuckle. Yes, I didn't think you'd call so quickly. I wasn't sure you'd believe me. George spoke of Helen often, Keanu said. He never mentioned you. He wouldn't. We had a falling out. Long ago, but there's something he didn't know. Something she never had the courage to tell him. Keanu's voice lowered. What do you mean? Can you come see me? She asked gently. I'm in Big Bear. It's not far, Keanu agreed. The next day, he drove his car through winding mountain roads, the scenery turning green and peaceful. It felt like traveling into another world, far from Hollywood, far from noise, far from the past. He reached a small cabin tucked between tall pine trees. An older woman in a gray sweater stepped out to greet him. Her hair was white, her eyes sharp but kind. You look just like she described you, she said as he stepped out. Keanu smiled. George never mentioned you. He wouldn't. We lost touch, but Helen, she stayed in touch with me through letters, even after she got sick. They sat inside by the fireplace. She brought out a small wooden box from a drawer and placed it on the table. This belonged to Helen, she said. She gave it to me before she passed. She told me, someday, someone will come into George's life, someone different. Someone who sees more than the surface. I believe she meant you. Keanu slowly opened the box. Inside were old letters, faded and folded carefully. And at the bottom, a tiny envelope with George's name on it, never opened. Helen had written it, but never gave it to him. Why didn't she send it? Keanu asked softly. She was scared, her sister said. George was so busy, always tired, always working. She thought he wouldn't understand. Keanu opened the letter. Inside, Helen had written about a child. George, unpregnant. I wanted to tell you in person, but something in your eyes told me you weren't ready to slow down. I don't know what will happen, but if anything ever happens to me, I want this child to grow up knowing they were born of love, not loneliness. Keanu single quotes as hands began to tremble. A child? He whispered. The woman nodded. A daughter. Her name is Ruby. Helen gave birth to her in secret while George was away on a long business trip. She planned to tell him, but then her health declined. She left Ruby with me before she passed. George never knew. I tried reaching out, but he vanished after Helen's funeral. Keanu sat in stunned silence. Ruby. He couldn't speak for a while. Then, quietly he asked, where is she now? She's 27, the woman said. She lives in San Diego. She works at a bookstore. She doesn't know anything about George. She thinks her father left before she was born. Keanu felt something deep in his chest. Sadness, disbelief, but also responsibility. She deserves to know, he said. The woman nodded. Yes, but I think she should hear it from you. Keanu drove back to Malibu that evening, the mountain air still clinging to his jacket. He stood on the balcony, looking out at the dark waves crashing against the rocks. He thought of George, of the things he never knew, of the moments he would never get back. But Keanu also thought of Ruby, the child born from a quiet kind of love. A secret meant to be protected, not hidden. He decided to visit the bookstore. He didn't want to just walk in and drop everything at once. So he waited. He watched from a distance. He saw a young woman arranging books on a shelf, laughing with a customer. She had Helen's eyes when she stepped outside for a break. Keanu approached gently. Hi, he said, offering a soft smile. My name is Keanu. She looked at him, puzzled. Like Keanu Reeves? He chuckled. Yeah, I get that a lot. She laughed, then sipped her coffee. What brings you here? I knew your mother, he said carefully. Ruby single quotes S expression changed. You knew Helen? Keanu nodded. And I knew George. She looked down. I never met him. I don't know anything about him. I think it's time you did. He handed her the letter from Helen. Ruby read it slowly, her lips trembling, her fingers tightening around the paper. By the end, tears filled her eyes. Why didn't she tell me? She whispered. She tried, Keanu said softly. But life, it moves too fast sometimes. Ruby sat on the bench outside the bookstore, holding the letter against her chest. Is he still alive? Keanu swallowed hard. No. He passed a few weeks ago, but he left something behind. Something meant for you. Ruby looked up, confused. For me? A home, Keanu said. A story, a name, and maybe a new beginning. Ruby stared at him, eyes wide and searching. Who are you? She asked quietly. Keanu smiled. Just someone who saw him when he thought no one would. And in that moment, a new chapter began, one that George never got to write, but one Ruby would carry forward. The legacy of a silent father. Keanu sat on the porch of the Malibu house with Ruby beside him. The ocean roared softly in the distance. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with orange and pink. Neither of them spoke for a while. The silence wasn't empty, it was full of thought, full of emotion. Ruby held her mother's letter in her lap, her fingers running over. The words like they were a piece of lost treasure. She had just learned the truth about her father. A man she never met. A man who didn't even know she existed. And yet, through Keanu's voice, she had begun to feel like she knew George already. He used to sit right here, Keanu said softly, and listen to the ocean. He told me once it was the only sound. That made him feel human again. Ruby looked out at the waves, then turned toward him. Do you think he would have loved me? Keanu's throat tightened. I think he would have loved you more than anything in the world. He just never got the chance. She looked down, her voice small. I spent so many nights wondering why he never came for me. Now I know. He never knew I was even there. Keanu nodded slowly. He was far from perfect. But he was broken, not heartless. If he had known Ruby, everything would have changed. Ruby's eyes welled with tears. I wish I had one memory. Just one moment with him. Keanu stood and walked into the house. When he returned, he held George's leather journal in his hands. He handed it to her gently. This, he said, is your memory. She took the journal with care, like it was fragile. This was his? Every word, Keanu said. It's not just his story. It's your legacy too. For the next hour, she sat and read quietly while Keanu gave her space. The sky grew darker, stars beginning to peek through. As she reached the final page, her tears flowed freely, but her smile slowly returned. He was so lonely, she whispered. Double quotes. Yes, Keanu said, sitting beside her again. But he wasn't alone at the end, and now neither are you. Ruby looked at him, her eyes filled with questions. What do I do now? What am I supposed to do with all this? Keanu smiled softly. You live, you forgive, and maybe you keep the story going. Weeks passed. Ruby moved into the Malibu house. Not to replace George, but to feel close to the father she never met. She didn't touch anything for the first few days. She just walked around quietly, reading old notes, listening to the silence, learning him in her own way. Keanu visited often. Not to guide her, but to support her. He helped her start something new. The Helen and George Center, a branch of the Easton Foundation, dedicated to single mothers and forgotten daughters. Ruby chose the name. Keanu funded the building. Together, they created something beautiful from something broken. On opening day, Ruby gave a short speech to a room full of women holding babies, girls holding hope. I never knew my father. She said, her voice steady, but because of him, I now know who I am. And this place is for anyone who's ever felt invisible. We see you, we believe in you. The applause that followed wasn't loud, it was full of emotion, full of connection. After the event, Keanu and Ruby stood together by a framed photo of George and Helen Young, smiling, holding hands. You gave him peace, you know, Ruby said to Keanu. Keanu looked at the picture. He gave me something too. He reminded me what truly matters. As they turned to leave, a small girl tugged on Ruby's dress. Are you the lady who owns this place? Ruby knelt down and smiled. No, sweetheart. This place belongs to all of us. Months later, on a quiet evening, Keanu returned to the beach one last time. He brought George's old chair and placed it on the sand. Beside it, he set down the journal, a photo of Helen and George, and a single seashell Ruby had found on their first walk together. He sat for a long while, listening to the waves. He whispered into the wind, You gave the world more than money, George. You gave it another chance, and it's still rippling. As the sky turned dark, Keanu stood, smiled toward the stars, and walked away. Behind him, the journal pages turned softly in the ocean breeze, still alive with words, still breathing with love.